pose this idea, the idea of using social networking and internet and as a way to connect people from here and there, wherever the there was going to be. That wasn't even a question we would have even asked 20 years ago. And so because of your own experience, your own backgrounds, you're making something possible that wasn't possible before. But it does fit, I guess it fits in line with what the church has been about from the beginning in terms of mission. Just to, sort of the phrase that I like to use a lot, and this is the one that even the universal church uses, and why do we exist at all? What I'm doing is under this idea of missionary cooperation. That there's really just one mission. It's God's mission. And that mission has a church. So I like to say, instead of the church having a mission, really it's the mission has a church. And when you say it that way, it's not just one function of many. This is what God is about in the world. And for whatever reason, God continues to call each of us in our own way to participate in that mission. So our call to mission it's a baptismal call. So when you're baptized into the church, and the church is missionary, so you're baptized into God's mission, whether you like it or not. That's part of what it means to be a Christian Catholic person. And over history, just your little comment about how things are changing in Zambia from the days of foreign missionaries from Europe going into places like Central Africa or Asia, and maybe for the first time announcing the gospel, maybe 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and then helping to build that church, and in different ones did it in different ways. I was in Kenya, and there it was very much evangelized by the Irish St. Patrick Fathers. And this issue of mission being doing for somebody, to doing with somebody, to supporting others who are doing it. This is sort of the evolution that's been going on all over the world. 50 years ago, you wouldn't have an African bishop. They'd still be Europeans. But within the last 15, 20 years now, you're seeing almost an entirely African church leading Africans. And so the Europeans, the Americans, those who may have been involved in some kind of direct mission service, are moving into this more cooperative role. And so it changes the way we do things. And one of the challenges that places like Zambia are having is this transition from people doing stuff for us, kind of a paternalistic approach to mission, to us taking responsibility. Not only are we called to mission, but they're called to mission as well. They're just as baptized as you and I are. And so to move from being a mission receiving kind of church, more of a passive receiver, to say, no, we're responsible. They're called to evangelize us just as much as we're called to evangelize them, and to cooperate with one another. So this is sort of where we are, and lay people, I think, like yourselves, are becoming part of this this movement of the church of what I'm calling cooperating in mission. So I wanted to say just a little something about what that looks like, and see how Mission Tree might fit into this movement in the church that's happening all over. Just how lay people are involved in mission in ways. So there was in 2007 there was a great article in America Magazine. It's run by the Jesuits, and the title of it was "The New Lay Faces of Missionaries." And what they were doing is acknowledging the presence of lay people in mission in a way that was not happening previously. That lay people are not just in this supporting role, but are getting more directly involved in mission service of all kinds. And in that article, there's a wonderful quote from Pope John Paul that acknowledged lay mission. He says, "It's necessary to recognize, and it is a title of honor, that some churches owe their origins to the activity of lay men and women, missionaries. missionary activity, which is carried out by a wide variety of ways, is the task of all the Christian faithful. So for those of us who grew up maybe before the late 60s, we may have seen our role in mission is to support the missionaries. The missionaries were these heroic figures. You know, they were like, they go off as lone rangers, they're larger than life, and they go and they're rugged individuals, and they pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and they go into the bush and they deal with, you know, that would have been the image that we'd grown up with. In the late 60s, the church began to invite dioceses and religious that had not been strictly missionary orders to start sharing their resources. So beginning in 57, there was a document called Fide Donum, which the Pope was asking the church in the established churches to begin sharing their people with the church in the developing world. So the Europeans began sharing the resources in Africa, and the Northern Americans started sharing the resources with Central and South America. And then following that, beginning, at least here in 1968, you began to see dioceses themselves sending priests to go off and serve. So for instance, we began a mission in Venezuela. We started sending priests from our diocese to go and serve. This was many dioceses were sending people to go. And after a while, these people start telling their friends back here, saying, this is what I'm doing in Venezuela, do you want to support me? So who are these people? It's their parishioners from back in the Twin Cities. And as the people started supporting their priests, you know, they started getting involved. And one thing led to another, and they started going down and helping. So here, at least, we have people, lay people themselves starting to go down and serve religious sisters, lay professionals, people going to serve for longer term, short term. And eventually that led to lay people themselves building on those relationships, beginning to initiate their own kinds of missionary activity. So groups of medical professionals going down and serving. The big movement that's happening here and across the country now are parishes of various kinds cooperating with mission parish in another part of the world. And they're cooperating in all kinds of ways. Maybe it's around family issues, around health care, just sharing back and forth. So now you've got this time in history where lay people themselves are initiating mission. The challenge is, as Brandon, you probably know as the board, is that our structures haven't necessarily caught up with the charism of lay people. So we have what we call lay associations of the faithful. So like the Marino lay missionaries, they're called a public association of the faithful. So there are many ways that the faithful associate. You know, you associate for a Bible study, you associate for the moms group, lay associations. And there are some that take on more, you know, you're representing the church, you're not just representing a group of the faithful in this informal way. And in some ways you're in that, you know, moving in that direction where you are organizing in some, you know, direct fashion to provide mission. So, you know, in our role as the director of the mission office, our goal is to try to figure out ways to connect this local church with the church's mission beyond the church. So we're the only organization, the Center for Mission, or our technical name is the Pontifical Mission Societies. We come from this word pontifical. It comes from a Latin word, pontus, same word that pontoon boats comes from. It means bridge. So a pontoon boat is a moving bridge, if you think of it that way. So pontifical means it's a bridging activity. So we're about bridging this local church with the universal church. And we're the only organization that exists not for anything happening within the diocese, but it's how do we connect the diocese beyond itself. So part of it is about supporting the young and developing churches. So up until 1908, this was a mission church. The U.S., the whole country was considered mission territory. And so the reason we were here is because the church primarily in France and Ireland and maybe to a lesser extent in Germany, but European churches sent their personnel, sent their money, sent their support so that we could grow and flourish. And if you go around to just about any of the churches that have been around for 100 years, they can trace themselves back to some European connection. So since 1908, we've been in this role of now mission sending, and here we are doing what was done for us, so cooperating with the young and developing churches, primarily in Africa and Asia, and also like in the Pacific Island area, some parts of Latin America. But in terms of the cooperation we're doing now, it's different. It's not so much doing for, because like I said, we're not there going saving pagans. These are Catholics, fellow Catholics, who we have we live at a very interesting time where we can have relationships with Catholics in a way that we couldn't before. So it opens up new possibilities for cooperating together in mission. And I think one of the challenges that we face as Americans going into mission, every culture has its biases. But one of the biases that I see we struggle with here is that when we talk about sharing gifts and faith, one of our tendencies is to define gifts always in terms of materiality. What are our gifts? Money, stuff, and that kind of thing. And it wasn't until we, like for instance, with our sister diocese in Kenya, it wasn't until we began to relate with other Christians who don't base their lives, that they're not based on stuff. They don't have any stuff. They don't have any money. You begin to open up the vocabulary of gifts. And you begin to see that there is a poverty on both sides. And there are gifts on both sides. And so we both have biases. So our bias is that we think our job is to give to others. And as you get into it, you begin to see that there's something to receive and to give, I think, as you get into it. What I think is so unique about the mission tree is that you're open up a way of cooperating mission that we've never done before. We've been supporting vocations for, 1,000 years, but we've never done it this way before. And so when the idea of this kind of cooperating through the use of the internet, there was something in me that said, this is probably one of those next steps, in cooperation. What will it look like? I think, one of our goals is, how do we bring the church closer together? How do we deepen unity in the church? And so just by the use of being able to tell one another stories and put a face on the need and seeing each other and communicating in real time is something that just wasn't possible before. So I think the mission tree is, sort of a step in that direction of a new way of cooperating in mission. It's going to be happening at a time where we're not there saving pagans and announcing the gospel for the first time, but in many ways it's helping to enrich and empower that local church there to be the church. Not doing it for them, but in a more mutual way, how can we cooperate with them to enrich them? And as you said so well, you go and as we get involved with this, they have gifts to offer us, but not maybe ways that we would normally define gifts. But most people I meet who go, like myself, when you go and you begin to experience people who have so little in one sense, who seem so rich in another sense, and that sort of joy and love for faith in God, and they love the church, and their desire to live it out, despite having so little. There's something that comes back this way. So it's the idea. The other word that I like to use is that mission is always a mutual exchange. It's a mutual exchange of gifts. And so there's no power difference. We're not like, well, here's us because we got all the stuff, and here's them because they got nothing. But we're all baptized Catholics, and we're all sharing in this universal mission, and we all have something to give and something to receive. So I would locate Mission Tree somewhere in there, that it's offering a new means for for the church to cooperate in mission, and in particular right now around this idea of building up the leadership in the church, which is a huge need at this moment in time. When you go there, I don't know if you saw this, but when I go there, pastors who are leading these huge parishes, they're like 27 years old. It's a young church, young leaders with huge responsibilities. They have their main church, and then they have 27 stations. So I think it's a challenging time because there are so many material challenges, health challenges. If you've been paying attention, what's going on in East Africa, just survival, because of the drought and that. So you've got some real challenges on how do you lead in the middle of all of that. And you begin to see the kind of resourcefulness that people have to try to find ways to sustain and build this church. So it's an exciting, challenging time for them. And the Holy Father had said in January of the new millennium, he said Africa is a church that's rising and falling at the same time. It's the most growing church in the world in terms of numbers, church growing. It's the fastest growing church in the world, and it's probably the most suffering church in the world because of just the poverty and the challenges, civil issues, and can they develop a life that they can sustain. So what's our role in trying to cooperate with them? I think it's things like this. How can we work together to help the church to flourish and grow, and help them to build leaders and systems that can sustain that church, so that they need to be sending their own mission. So anyway, I guess that's really all I want to say about it. That we're all part of this in one way or another, and I'm just really grateful that you're willing to be so innovative. That's why I said we should invest in this. So we had this grant to invest in mission vocations, and I'd never invested anything like this before. But that's been sort of the story of my life in the mission office, is that there are things that you just have to pay attention to. And I think this is one of those movements we have to pay attention to. So I think, I want to encourage you. You've passed many tests just to get established. That was my first. What kind of perseverance do they have? You have amazing perseverance, and you learn things, I think, through that process of persevering. And I think the big struggle is, like I said, the church's structures haven't caught up with the movement yet. And I think the church itself hasn't caught up with what does it mean for lay people to be leading in mission. It's a different way of thinking. It reminds me of back when I was a kid and they first started allowing lay people to give out communion at Mass. We had Mr. Corrigan. He was the most upstanding man in the parish, and he would hand out communion, and everyone switched lines to go only where the priest was, because they couldn't imagine a lay people doing that. And then they started saying, well, the lay person is helping the priest. So the idea of lay people are helpers. And in this article they talk about, we've made this transition from lay people from being helpers to ministers. That you're not just baptized to be helpers, you're called to ministry. So I hope you can hear this and receive this as a call, that how you will do this, it's still a work in progress, just like the website, right? So, but, we live at a very unique time when things like this are possible in a way they weren't before. So I really affirm what you're doing, and hopefully we could just continue to stay in relationship with each other along the way. And when you're rich and famous, I'll say I knew him well. So anyway, so thank you for all that you're doing, taking time out to do this kind of work. I'm just excited to watch what happens. I don't know anything. I tell you, I don't have a clue how any of it works. But I'm excited. I'm excited. But see that your kids can help you with that. But this is the good thing. When you don't, this is one of the things I've learned. The times that I feel I know the least, that's when there's the least ego involved too. And there's the most authentic service going on. So I'm less afraid of things that I don't know what's going on. And as long as we just continue to stay in there, keep with it, there's something good about that. If you have it all under control, I don't know, you probably wouldn't be as open. And you're at that stage, it's still kind of a movement, and so who knows where it's going to lead? You're naming some of the possible directions. Maybe it's not just supporting seminary. Maybe that's one. But maybe it's about supporting vocational structures that can foster this. I don't know. Then you have some freedom to sort that out. So,
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for.
Yeah.
Appreciate. As I said in the introduction, you've been very great to engage with because of your expertise in this medium of missionary activity, and certainly your endorsement and affirmation of what we're doing, I think, spurs us all on. It's what spurred me on from the beginning to believe that this is something the church needs and could really provide fruit. So thank you for coming. Thank you for speaking to the history and context of kind of the missionary church in Africa and even in the United States, and kind of what you see as our role in that. And thanks for driving up.
You're welcome. I can leave too if you have other things, or I can stay.